Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2014 movie titled The Salvation. Please be advised that there will be spoilers ahead. In the first scene, we meet John Jensen, who is waiting at a train station with his brother, Peter. These two Danish combat veterans crossed the Atlantic to the United States 7 years ago, looking for a new beginning. John is finally ready to reconnect with his family after all these years of hardship. Soon enough, he sees his wife, Marie, and their son approaching him with enormous smiles. It's amusing how the little man greets him using the only English sentence he knows. John then takes them to see Peter before they all return home. Peter explains that he has some business to do and will be in the city for a while. Later, the lovebirds share a sweet kiss before boarding a stagecoach that they had reserved earlier, only to discover that a friendly couple had already entered. The woman engages in a series of small talk with John before being abruptly cut off by two rough-looking men. One of these people is Paul, De La Rue's recently released jail brother. Things start to unravel at that point, guiding John towards a path where happiness seems a distant goal. Later that night, while the criminals are half asleep and half drunk, John teaches his son about local fauna and plans a hunting trip. Paul suddenly decides to start chatting with Marie, offering her a sip of his drink and attempting to strike up a discussion. But when Marie declines, this initially kind gesture shifts to a more aggressive tone with a sense of threat. Because the woman does not understand the language, John instructs her in Danish to play along, but Paul refuses to let up, equating Marie's silence to his own wife's, claiming she is mute because Indians ripped out her tongue. He is flirting with Marie, but John is the one who steps in, answers every question, and maintains control. Paul escalates the situation by grabbing Marie's dress and threatening to use violence. John intervenes, asking the person to back off, but the other thug draws a revolver and points it at him. While observing his wife's torture, John whispers in Danish to Marie, urging her to bite the man's ear. John quickly disarms the mobster, taking possession of the gun. He saves his wife, but then makes the foolish mistake of instructing his kid to grab the gangster's gun. The little child gets down to pick up the gun, which gives the mobster the perfect opportunity to capture him by putting a knife to his throat. John is urged to jump off, or his family would be slaughtered. He pauses for a while, trying to say something to Marie, but is thrown out of the stagecoach and rolls down onto the green ground below. John dashes after the stagecoach, but it rapidly vanishes from view. All he can hear is his wife and son crying in the distance, which motivates him to keep going. Despite tripping and falling multiple times, he always gets back up and starts moving. His frenzied pursuit comes to a devastating halt when he discovers his son's lifeless body on the ground. John falls to his knees beside him, shivering as he seeks signs of life. Tears fall down his cheeks as he holds his son tight before getting up and going away. As John walks down the road, he notices a stagecoach stopped ahead. He lays his son's body next to what appears to be the coachman's corpse. He grabs the dead man's gun and begins marching toward the stagecoach. Based on his previous expertise, he fires a shot that startles the horses before taking aim at the gangsters. He dispatches one of them with perfect accuracy before pursuing Paul, who is attempting to flee. He passionately argues that he is innocent of killing John's wife and son, but John is no longer interested in talking. Driven by hatred, he relentlessly fires at Paul until the gun runs out of bullets. As he gathers his family's dead, he appears calm on the surface, but deep inside, he is drowning in shock and sadness. The morning begins when his brother arrives, observing some weird horses outside. Peter attempts to console John before beginning to dig graves for his loved ones. The scene shifts to a fearsome gang of horseback riders riding into town with an air of authority, as if they own the place. Henry De La Rue, an imposing figure with a grim past as a colonel in Indian wars, stands out. He dismounts alongside the High Sparrow, Nathan Keene, a genuine jack of all trades who effortlessly plays the roles of mayor, priest, and undertaker. After discovering two of his men dead nearby, De La Rue demands explanations. The mayor is virtually shivering in his boots, telling De La Rue that none of the residents had anything to do with it. What he doesn't realize is that one of the dead men is De La Rue's brother Paul. The gang leader stands over his brother's lifeless body, and no one dares to say anything. De La Rue suddenly breaks the stillness and informs Sheriff Malik and Mayor Keene that they have until noon to turn up the killer or he will take 2 lives in retaliation. He even uses a religious metaphor for dramatic effect, a tooth for a tooth. To emphasize his point, De La Rue says that if the mayor does not choose the victims, he will take 4 lives rather than simply 2. Mrs. Borowski, the elderly woman who runs the local gun store, is picked along with a poor man with no legs. De La Rue demonstrates his cold-bloodedness by executing the legless man immediately. Mrs. Borowski prays for De La Rue's bad soul before he kills her. However, De La Rue's journey is far from over. He requires more than just an elderly woman and a crippled man. He goes on to kill a third victim in front of his wife, thus satisfying his appetite for blood. It's strange how De La Rue appears above the law, as even the sheriff advises everyone to remain quiet. It turns out that the townspeople have been paying De La Rue's gang on a regular basis, claiming it is for protection. Now he wants to double their payments until the sheriff discovers the man who killed his brother. Later on the same day, the Jensen brothers pack up and move west. People recognize them as the only proficient shooters in the area, prompting questions about their involvement in De La Rue's brother's murder. When they arrive in Black Creek, someone in town swiftly reports them to the sheriff. Unbeknownst to him, John attempts to sell their land to Mayor Keene, but the lofty mayor rips him off by offering barely half of what John bought it for 6 years before. Keene goes on to describe that the murder of De La Rue's brother the night before in a stagecoach caused De La Rue to raise his fees and property prices to fall. It is only now that he understands he has killed De La Rue's brother. With no other option, he sells the house for far less than its value and hides the money in his boot, as Keene instructs, to keep it safe. As John mounts his horse to flee, a swarm of gunmen approaches him from all sides, eventually stopping him and arresting him after the sheriff shoots his horse. Later, we encounter De La Rue and his money handler, Madeline, Paul's mute widower, also known as Princess. They are joined by diplomats from the Standard Atlantic Oil Company, who hand over a large sum of money to De La Rue while also warning him about his violent tactics with the townspeople. They explain that they had to disconnect Black Creek's connection to the federal government so Sheriff Malik could not seek assistance. Peter is soon apprehended as well, despite the fact that he appears to have fought hard and given a few deputies a productive punching session while being arrested. Sheriff Malik subsequently has a heart-to-heart with John, telling him how De La Rue was once a fine person before the Indian conflict corrupted him. He tells John that he must give him in and that his death will buy them time until the federal government's assistance, which he is wired for, arrives. The next morning, the sheriff surrenders John to De La Rue's soldiers. After giving him a sample of knuckle pie, they tie him to a wooden pole near De La Rue's office. When De La Rue and Madeline arrive, John informs them that her beloved husband murdered his son and raped his wife, but De La Rue interrupts him with a strong hit. It appears like De La Rue intends to leave John and the son to perish of dehydration. As the sun beats down on John and vultures circle above, ready to feast on his flesh, Mayor Keene appears. But instead of assisting, he steals John's money and boots, then joins De La Rue and addresses him by his first name as if they were buddies. Meanwhile, with Sheriff Malik gone to church, Peter intends to escape from his cell and join his brother. Peter outsmarts him by attempting to deceive him. He tries to irritate him with his words in order to get him closer to his cell. Peter's strategy works when he involves the deputy, who eventually knocks the man out and escapes. The following scene reveals that De La Rue isn't too angry about his brother's death. With Paul gone, De La Rue views his brother's mute widow as his own. He's in bed with the princess, who obviously does not want to be there. Her bleeding nose and dark eyes tell it everything. He then offers to make her the Queen of New Orleans, which she does not seem pleased about. Next, we find John suffering in the rain, but he won't be alone for long since Peter arrives. He silently dispatches 2 gang members, frees John, and then shoots another pair to clear their escape route. This naturally alarmed De La Rue and his soldiers. They promptly began chasing the boys on horseback. After dealing with the harsh weather for so long, John is unable to hold onto his horse and falls to the ground. This forces Peter to devise a new scheme. He hides John behind a large boulder to keep him safe and uses himself as a decoy to divide De La Rue's soldiers. The next morning, John is so thirsty that he hurries to drink the first unclean water he sees. When he hears De La Rue's men approaching, he quickly searches for a spot to hide. What he sees next utterly destroys him. A gang member pulls Peter's body behind a horse. John's face is filled with desperation and trauma after losing his final family member. When De La Rue returns to his territory, he discovers several of his men dead on the ground. The safe is empty, and Madeline has vanished from sight. It's apparent she grabbed all of the oil money and fled. With a bag full of money slung over her shoulder, Madeline has arrived at the train station, prepared to board the next train. She's nervous, distrustful of everyone around her, and only relaxes slightly when the train begins to move. She sighs with relief, but it doesn't last long. De La Rue's soldiers show there and attempt to halt the train. Panicking, Madeline rushes, looking for an exit. However, her efforts prove futile, and eventually, they apprehend her. When brought before De La Rue, he slaps her hard, and she spits back at him. Despite De La Rue's immediate desire to kill her, his right-hand man suggests she could serve a valuable purpose. That's why he chooses to postpone her execution. He orders his man to cut her throat after gaining control over her. As John explores across the lonely lands near Black Creek, he discovers a well. But then he meets Mrs. Whistler. She shoots warning shots, but John is really thirsty. He ignores it and continues on his way to the well. He is unaware that the well contains crude oil. Mrs. Whistler recognizes John and lowers her gun, providing him with refuge, bread, and water. She is the widow of de la Rue's third victim, whom he murdered early in the film. Dealing with difficult living conditions and the loss of her husband, she has chosen to leave the area and begs John to accompany her, warning him that de la Rue will undoubtedly kill him too. However, John appears to have a compelling incentive to stay. Later that night, John approaches the mayor's house with a revolver pointed at his head. The terrified elderly guy promptly returns John's boots and money, but that is not all John wants. As he questions the mayor, John discovers that the man also purchased Mrs. Whistler's land, though the deeds for her and John's holdings are not readily accessible. When John inquires about his link to de la Rue, the mayor attempts to fake his way out. However, after John butt strokes him and throws him into a coffin, the mayor reveals the truth. He admits that he passes over the land deeds to de la Rue, who is buying up and eventually owning the entire town. After that, John visits Mrs. Borowski's former store, which is now operated by her young grandson, to purchase some ammo and explosive substances. While he's there, he tells Wojciech to warn the sheriff about Mayor Keene and de la Rue's dirty practices. When Wojciech discovers that John intends to face de la Rue's group alone, he sees an opportunity to exact revenge for his grandmother's death and insists on joining him. The following morning, John ingeniously employs 3 decoys. The first is the coffin containing Keene's dead body, which draws the enemy's notice. De la Rue himself opens the coffin and instructs his troops to burn it. Meanwhile, Wojciech lights a blaze nearby to further distract de la Rue's troops. Wojciech begins shooting at the perfect moment, despite his shakiness and nervousness. Then the group finds the stable is also on fire. While de la Rue's men are attempting to rescue the stuck horses, John picks them out one by one from his well-hidden position. Wojciech chooses to sneak up to a building's rooftop to gain a vantage point while carrying a bottle of flammables. Little does he realize that the ceiling creaks, revealing his position to a gang member who is smoking a cigarette. Following the sound, the gangster ascends to the room where de la Rue's right-hand man restrains Madeleine. As Wojciech shoots and injures a gang member, a thug in the same building opens fire on the ceiling, killing the youngster as we hear his cry and the smashing of glass. Just as the thug is feeling confident, the flammable liquid escapes through the ceiling and ignites his cigarette, setting him on fire and eventually causing the entire building to burn down. While John hardly has time to process Wojciech's death, he notices the thug carrying Madeleine out of the burning building. With razor-sharp focus, John takes a shot and shoots the thug in the leg, forcing him to fall off the edge. Just as he finishes off the thug, another gang member discovers where John is hiding owing to the gunshots and begins shooting aimlessly at the wall. John now plays cat and mouse with his next victim, hidden in the tunnel beneath the floor. The gang member notices John's gun barrel and begins firing the floor in an attempt to hit him, but he steps right into a trap when he tries to peep through the tile cracks. John stabs him in the eye before capturing him and viciously slicing his throat. But then John makes a terrible error by remaining out in the open and forgetting about de la Rue. Of course, de la Rue does not waste his opportunity, unleashing a shot that knocks John to the ground. It appears he has lost the fight, but de la Rue admits he underestimated him. Just when everything seems hopeless, John's savior emerges out of nowhere. Madeleine shoots de la Rue twice without hesitation. Finally, John shoots the man in the head to kill him. After that, John and Madeleine find themselves aiming weapons at each other, but they quickly realize that they are not the true enemy here. Soon enough, Malik and his team arrive, congratulating John on sparing the community from de la Rue's wrath. However, upon Madeleine's arrival, the sheriff immediately becomes vigilant, anticipating potential trouble. That's when John steps in and proclaims that she is under his protection. Both had their guns ready, indicating to the sheriff that he should back off. After the sheriff and his men leave, the quiet man and the mute woman begin on a new journey. It'll definitely be riddled with awkward silences, but who knows? Maybe things will work out, and these two may be a nice, peaceful couple after all. Thank you for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.